with the Equine Lands Conservation Resource. If you want to come over oh, you have your PowerPoint? Okay, I'm going to put you over there then. They've become the hub for when there was no place to send information on good urban planning for horses or good equestrian district zoning. There was no journal articles, no place to put it. The Equine Land Conservation Resource was the place to put it. And so they have quite a good database of a lot of different communities and a lot of different situations that Anna's going to share with us today.
Thank you, Marianne. Am I okay camera-wise to move over here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Stay low.
Stay low. Okay. Okay. Well, first I want to say thank you for being here and thank you for the commitment you're showing to making Wellington work, because Wellington's not just important for Florida, it's not just important for Palm Beach County, it's important for our industry, for our sport, and for America's stature in the international horse community. So I'm very honored and pleased to be in this room with all of you. The Equine Land Conservation Resource is a national 501c3 nonprofit organization. Our mission is to keep land open and available to support and enjoy our horses. So that means places to ride them, places to grow hay for them, places to compete them, trails to ride on, everything that we think of when we think of enjoying and being with our horses and making sure that they're having healthy, safe, and happy lives. That is our mission. Why do we do that? Well, we do that because horses are important to our culture, to our heritage, our history, and to our economy. They support our industry, they provide jobs, they have a unique place in the American landscape and our narrative. We've gone from being a country where most people have access to or experiences with horses to a place where it's become a scarcer and scarcer opportunity. And at ELCR, we want to make sure that in 15 years, and that is the timeline we're dealing with land loss for horse usage, we want to make sure that in 15 years we still have the lands that keep our horses available to us and make sure that they remain part of our culture and our heritage. I'm going to talk to you today about one aspect of the work we do. The way we go about our work is by providing information, tools, templates, resources, and technical assistance to individuals, organizations, sometimes businesses, and very often communities that are struggling with how to keep their horse entities open, how to keep their land open to horses, and how to balance the needs of their community and their ecology with the needs and the health of the horses that they want to be part of that area. We also focus a great deal on disseminating information and acquiring information, building networks to share that information, and we're particularly interested in building out the information around the economic models that make horses an important part of a community and make horse businesses work. So I think that'll be a particularly interesting part of the conversation today. I'm going to walk through a couple of examples this morning of planning models that work in other communities. And the reason we want to do this is because we need a plan. I showed this slide to a group of high school students a little while ago, and the question they came back to me with was, is that good or bad? It's a good question. And really the answer is it depends on the community, and I think that's something to bear in mind as we have the discussions today. The examples I present today are informative. They're not magic bullets. They won't address every need for Wellington or answer all our questions, but hopefully they will start dialogue and discussion of what does work and why. So I wanted to start out with by citing some common themes of when you look at a community that successfully accomplished a workable living equestrian component in their comprehensive plan, what it looks like. First, it means including a broad range of stakeholders so that the impact of having a facility or a venue on the ecology is planned for from the outset and thought of and worked around, because there are almost always very good solutions if we just get to talking ahead of action. The effort to communicate clearly was important, and I use those words purposefully, effort, In each of the cases I'll cite, there were points where they did not succeed in communicating clearly, but there was a clear representation of the intention to be clear and plain. And sometimes having that level of trust and understanding that you're trying to be clear and plain was more important than actually accomplishing it. A lot of opportunities for public input, surveys, public meetings, a lot of discussion, particularly among the horse community, people who ride, people who own horses, and people who don't, people who are not familiar with horses and experience them in different ways. The next point on the direct handling of points of conflict, that doesn't mean they all got resolved or resolved in the way that it had been thought they would be resolved in the beginning, but they were handled, discussed, and openly aired, and that was incredibly important. The recognition of the role of horses. This really encompasses not only a recognition of the role of horses in the community, but also a sense of vision for the role that horses should play in the community's identity. A little bit of a brand around horses and the thinking around horses. And then the final point, which cannot be understated, was the recognition that something needs to be done now. That almost always got past all the other things on the list in terms of, are we actually going to get to a solution? It really depends on that recognition that now is the time to just take care of this and get it resolved. So with that, I will jump into the examples. So Marin County, California is just north of San Francisco. I've got a few facts about it, as I will with the other two communities I will highlight, just to give you some size context there. The situation was that they were in a very expensive, very ecologically sensitive area. The community had a strong idea about who they were as a group. They valued the concept of horses in the community. They valued the rural heritage, but it was disconnected from the way things had been planned for and developed. There was a lot of pressure, and it seemed like there weren't a lot of solutions because the cost of land and the cost of acting was going to be prohibitive. So at almost every turn when something was proposed, it was inconceivably not going to happen. It was too hard, too many stakeholders, too much ecological risk, and too much cost. So what happened is they came to that moment of urgency, needing to act, and they determined that if they wanted to make something happen, it was something that the community needed to invest in. So a group of civic leaders came together with some citizens and some elected officials and came up with the concept of adding a 0.25% sales tax to support having the equestrian-focused development and to offset the need to improve properties to meet the ecological standards that they needed to meet. So they created incentives for property owners to improve their properties and to make it so that they weren't having runoff and soil loss issues. At the same time, the community got the vote of confidence of saying, we value this enough to pay for it. And that was a very important point for them. They moved away from having absolutes on the ecological issues and shared access issues. So when the dialogue started in Marin County, what was happening was that there was only one way this could be resolved on this side, and there was only one way it could be resolved on that side, and it was never going to be resolved because neither way was very realistic, and it took compromise on both sides to make it work. So they were able to exchange some more sensitive land for land that was less sensitive. They were able to come up with rules that were mutually enforced by user groups, both with cyclists and with horses, to make shared trails work. So the other interesting factor that came out of this was the county invested in facilities for horses. They have two, actually now county-run stabling facilities, and they also support a county property that has a hack line on it so that people who cannot otherwise participate in horses have a low-cost access to horses. And this really was all made workable over the long term by the Community Horse Council. The outcome has been incredibly successful. The sense of community ownership means that people are minding the rules on their own without strong enforcement because they look at it as a public trust that they are taking care of. That's been very important on adhering to best management practices and keeping the ecological standards in a sensitive area up. The community brand around the horse community, the horses there is much stronger. It's an attractor for that area. It's a very vibrant community and very diverse. And the other thing that they've done well is they've really recognized that all land use decisions need to be viewed through this lens. So that the development that might be going on around a shopping center or a hotel needs to be assessed in the overall equation along with the equestrian plan, how the runoff, how this is going to affect how the ecological services that are provided by the horse pastures could help make that kind of development possible, and how you keep that balance. So that was Marin County. The next place I'd like to talk about is going to seem a little bit distant from Wellington and not just geographically. It is Highland Township, Michigan. Highland Township is a small rural community outside of Detroit, which I'm sure most people don't think of as a horse area. But Highland Township is an interesting place from the conversation we're having today because it was a community that really thought of itself as a horse community, even though it's a smaller area and more rural. They really thought of themselves as an equestrian area. It was very economically challenged, low economic growth, everything on the scale that you think of as a negative in a community. And they were at a crossroads. How were they going to do anything about this? And rather than choosing what can often feel like the more obvious road of saying, let's give some tax breaks and bring in a factory, let's try and attract that kind of industry, they decided to remake themselves based on who they felt they were, which was an equestrian community. So they turned themselves into a community that has trails along their sidewalks, and sometimes in some places trails instead of sidewalks. They have a completely connected trail system that goes all around the community, so you can ride from an outlying housing development into the downtown area, which is, actually you can see that right there. All of this was very much led by the citizens. That people felt ownership of the community, and as a result of that, it's turned into a real attractor for people to come and live in the community. And what happens when the population density increases, that now they have more investment in stores and all the supplies that are coming in for the horses. And it's important to note that the attraction hasn't just been for people with horses. The attraction has been for people who enjoy what they perceive of living in that kind of landscape and that kind of community. The non-riders are enjoying the idea that they look out their windows when they're having their morning coffee and they're seeing horses coming into town, and they're seeing people living this lifestyle, passing them, and having that harmony between the horse people and the non-horse people has been a real success factor for the town. The trail system is largely maintained by the citizens, and it's been incredibly successful that way, and it's required very little community investment as a result of that. So that's Highland. And the last community I'll talk about is Fairfax County, Virginia, which is near and dear to my heart. That's where I hail from. And Fairfax County is an interesting place in comparison to Wellington, because Fairfax County has a lot of the same economic advantages as this area, and it also has a lot of similar development pressures. Fairfax County was rapidly urbanizing. It's just outside of the Washington, D.C. area for anyone who's not familiar with the geography there. And it alternates with Loudoun County, Virginia, as being one of the highest income communities in the country, and which is interesting because both of them have strong horse cultures. Fairfax County had a very strong history around horses. They still have a trail network that goes through a portion of the county, and they used to have a fox hunt as recently as 15 years ago, and they actually had some communities that were built around to be residential communities with a horse focus. But what happened was they had inconsistent zoning, so that your 5-acre horse farm was taxed as entirely residential, which as property values went up became highly unaffordable, and properties were being sold and subdivided again and redeveloped. And then the facilities that were supporting the horses in the community closed because there was no way to keep them open in a commercially viable way with the way things were zoned and taxed, and with the value of the land for other development. So they saw themselves go from a community with a large equestrian presence to a community with a very diminished equestrian presence in roughly 15 years. It was a significant change, and the county was a little bit late in catching up on it. But what happened was the County Board of Supervisors had a moment after an informal survey was presented to them on what the average spending was for a horse boarded in Fairfax County, because that's what most of those 30 facilities were. And they had a moment of shock. They realized they were missing an important part of their economy, not just their economy, but who they thought they were as a community. So the county supervisors realized that, and they decided they needed to make some changes. So they appointed an equestrian task force. In doing so, they tried to be very conscious of representing different stakeholders. They did a great deal of community outreach. They did surveys among horse owners about what kinds of facilities were needed, which was very interesting because we found that from the community planning side, they had a really hard time guessing what was needed, and opening up that door of communication was really important to making that happen. And they kept the planners involved with the equestrian task force and with conservation experts, because it is in the Chesapeake watershed and on the shores of the Potomac. They kept everything very tightly tied together so that the final plan really covered the issues that needed to be covered. The commitment to protect what was left was very important in the outcome. Now, the hard thing about Fairfax County that I hope we can prevent with ongoing dialogue here is they acted too late. They can't reclaim what they've lost. They can only kind of patch together what is still there, and they're fighting valiantly to do that. But they are acting now. So what they came out with was some pretty significant changes to zoning and to some of the boundaries around the water management, water and soil conservation district, in terms of, for soil conservation, the boundaries on property lines for barns and that type of stuff, which allowed a lot of facilities that were about to go under to stay open. And then it really focused on formalizing access around the trails, around informal easements, and also around properties that are operating on public lands and properties that are operating in quasi-public space, so spaces that are owned by another nonprofit, a land trust, and that type of thing. So it was all very, it's similar to Wellington in the sense of the complexity of the land ownership, and you're dealing with public-private, and the complexity of investment. And again, unfortunately, they were a little too late. So I wanted to wind up by talking about what works as far as what you need to see in a successful plan. And this is just kind of a checklist that seems to be the elements that are in common with all plans that work. Implicit in the first one is something I didn't really discuss that has been a success factor in other communities, and that is, do you have a vision? What does this plan support your vision? I didn't put the vision in the what works for other communities piece because of one very interesting factor. At ELCR, we have a list of case histories of about 36 communities that have done equestrian planning well across the United States. And in talking to different communities to get ready for this presentation, what I found was that I would ask the vision of different stakeholders of what the vision was, and a lot of times they didn't have the same vision. There were some similar themes in it, but it wasn't always the same. But the commonality was wanting to see the sustaining presence of horses in the horse industry in their community. But generally, does the plan support what you're trying to accomplish with this? Have the points of conflict been addressed? Ignoring them never works, so it makes sense to address them, even if it's to address them to say it's not going to be resolved, but we are watching this and we're paying attention to it. Have the people who are going to be impacted by this been included in the discussions and the communications? Public involvement, obviously, environmental realities. Emergency planning is getting to be a bigger and bigger issue across the country. I know it's a huge one here. The input issues with horses is getting to be a still bigger issue. Horses need hay and forage and feed, and in a lot of places you just can't grow hay, or it doesn't make sense to grow hay, and this would be one, I would dare say, where it would make no sense to try and build a hayfield here. So how does the hay get here? What does that look like, and how does that work? Transportation, that would cover the hay as well as horses coming in, and as well as things like horses crossing roads to get to showgrounds that are used by as commuter routes. How does that get managed? And the inclusion of both public and private lands in the plan, an important part. And I will just wrap up. Marianne, are we going to do questions later, or are we?
Well, I thought George would make a couple comments and then have all
Perfect.
time for questions and answers.
Perfect, thank you. And like I said, ELCR does work with individuals, organizations, businesses, and local and community governments. So this is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out.